Welcome to the Shepherd Mills, Inc. From alpaca to yak, the Shepherd's Mill creates an exquisite yarns and fabrics from the nation's finest natural fibers. If you desire marketable product from your own fiber-producing animals, artfully conscious created interior design or fashion products, or U.S.-sourced, U.S.-produced netting, weaving, or crochet yarn and hand spinners roving and other fine fiber arts supplies, we're here to help. If you have fiber to process at the Shepherd Mill, our goal is to provide you with a quality finished product that we will be happy using and proud to sell. As a producer, you may know exactly what you want. If so, we ask a few questions and do our best to meet your specifications.
What sets the Purina goat mineral and the Purina wind and rain sheep mineral apart from other minerals that are on the market is because they are designed by folks that are in the business. We work very hard at the Purina Animal Nutrition Center in Gray Summit, Missouri to maximize efficiency, to increase the number of lambs that we have on the ground, and I know the goat herds that we work with are on the same role as us. The best way for producers to ensure that they don't have a mineral deficiency is to supply a quality mineral. That's where we have worked so diligently on the Purina goat mineral and also the wind and rain sheep mineral to provide myself and other producers an opportunity to decrease problems. From the reproductive standpoint, vitamins and minerals play a huge role in sheep and goat. That's where we have found the biggest contribution to our operation in terms of AI and embryo and then conception on first-time service. So there's a distinct role that the minerals play in repro for us. That's what makes us unique and different, is because we're creating products that work for us.
Stay Tough Superior Fencing Products presents its fence test video. During this video, you'll witness the strength and resilience of a Stay Tough fixed knot fence compared to a standard hinge joint fence, as both are hit by a full-size truck. Stay Tough fence is made of high tensile wire that's 3 times stronger than low tensile wire and will stretch less than 1%. Low tensile wire will stretch more than 10%. Both fences were installed under identical circumstances and using the same tooling and fence design. Let's see the results. Stay Tough Fence comes with a 10-year written limited warranty. Contact us at 1-888-223-8322 or visit our website to find a dealer near you. Stay Tough Superior Fencing Products. Stay strong, stay tight, stay tough.
Although 2020 has been challenging for us all, it has also given us many reasons to be optimistic about the future of the American lamb industry. We are seeing significant increase in lamb consumption from both existing and new consumers, and like all of you in this essential industry, the employee owners at Superior Farms are working around the clock to meet the high demand for our products. And while supermarkets have seen a surge in the demand for lamb, our food service partners are finding creative new solutions to keep their businesses alive. Superior Farms is working with these loyal American lamb customers to develop new strategies and tactics to help them succeed in the months and years to come. Our goal remains to deliver a consistently great eating experience at a sustainable price for consumers and producers alike. Superior Farms is committed to working with every sector of the U.S. sheep industry to become more efficient and profitable, and we look forward to a safe and prosperous new year for all.
Making Kansas a better place to live and work has been our goal for over 100 years. It's a responsibility we don't take lightly.
Solids or sediment?
365 meters.
365 meters.
K-State Research and Extension serves our rural and urban neighbors by helping you adapt to new technologies, protect our environment, improve nutrition and food safety, and grow the next generation of leaders.
And my world. And my world.
We help farmers and ranchers adopt new tools that improve profitability in a rapidly changing marketplace.
That went into it, going to help some people.
We prepare and inspire leaders to take on challenges with confidence, be responsible, and give back.
Thank you very much. It will be a great help.
I think K-State Extension is a marvelous partner.
We bring people together to complement each other's unique strengths and make communities more vibrant and successful. We are Kansas State University, in every county, working shoulder to shoulder with organizations, local leaders, and you to help our state grow and thrive. We are K-State Research and Extension.
Hope you all had a good break. We're getting ready to start our comparing sheep and goat presentation. Presenting with me today is Alyssa Rippey May. She's a director and livestock specialist from Twin Creeks Extension District, and she has 35 head of goats, and I'll let her tell a little bit more about herself. So Alyssa.
Yeah, so I'll turn my video on here. Okay. So hi everybody, like Dwayne said, I am Alyssa Rippey May. I am the livestock and farm management agent with Twin Creeks up here. We are in Northwest Kansas, so Decatur, Sheridan, Graham, and Norton counties. And then, like Dwayne said, I have a small herd of commercial boar goats. I have had them probably a little over 15 years. I got my first set of kind of nice nannies when I was in junior high, and have really kept that herd going, had for the most part a closed herd, and just brought in different bucks as I went along. Excuse me. So for the most part, my goats end up selling to either other producers as kind of replacement nannies, or a few billies. And then anything that doesn't make the cut, I feel like, ends up going over to Colby Livestock and just gets sold in their sale. So that's kind of a little about me. Dwayne, did you want to do an introduction on you too?
Dwayne Craighead, let me turn on my camera, I guess. There we go. Dwayne Craighead, the county agent in Hodgman County. We used to have 300 to 600 head of ewes at one time, and we ended up getting out of the business a few years ago, but it's always been a passion of mine, the sheep industry has. And so with that, we've continued to host the sheep producers meeting, and this year we expanded it to include the goat producers. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, so Dwayne and I are going to split this presentation. I'm going to handle most of the goat stuff, and he's going to handle most of the sheep stuff. So we'll start off with taxonomy. We know goats and sheep are pretty closely related. They're both in the family Bovidae and in the caprine subfamily. Goats are Capra, or in the genus Capra, and then sheep are in the genus Ovis. Next slide there, Dwayne. Perfect. So the next question, can they mate? Sheep have 54 chromosomes and goats have 60. So for the short answer, yes, they can, but it's very similar to horses and donkeys. If sheep or goats mate, no fetuses have been able to survive in nature that we know of. Some have survived through production in a lab, but they are not fertile. Okay. All right, and then sheep and goats we know are both ruminants, like cattle. So they have that 4-part stomach where we have a reticulum, a rumen, an abomasum, and an omasum. They regurgitate their food and chew it again, so chewing their cud. We also have pseudo-ruminants, which are similar but only have 3 parts in their stomach, and that would include other small animals like alpacas and llamas. And then, of course, we have our hindgut fermenters like our horses that have a cecum. And then in addition, monogastrics, which of course are pigs and animals that have stomachs like we do. Okay. All right, so here we'll talk largely, of course, about our small ruminants or pseudo-ruminants, sheep, goats, deer, alpacas, and llamas. Next. And then they all have pretty similar uses. So among those would be meat, fiber, dairy, pasture or lawn landscape management, and then agritourism. And we'll talk a little bit more about each one of those. Okay, so starting off with meat. Of course, this is really the most popular reason that people raise sheep and goats. If you're raising your sheep or goats for meat, your primary income is probably from the sale of the offspring, either for harvest or for harvest and then packaged meat products. Unlike cattle, for sheep and goats, there's really a demand for all sizes of offspring. And that's kind of based on the type of market that we have for sheep and goats. We know for cattle, we kind of either have veal or a fully finished endpoint, kind of one endpoint that we're looking at. That is not the case with sheep and goats. And then when we look at our current market situation, the sheep industry, of course, has a very developed market. Goats, on the other hand, is growing, but is not near to the point that sheep are right now. Okay, so who really eats meat? So when we're thinking about lamb and mutton, we are primarily talking about people of the Jewish, Christian, or Muslim faiths. Goat meat is different. So the consumers for Chavan or Cabrito, like young goat, would be more people of Hispanic culture, Muslims, Arabs, Asians, Africans, and Caribbean islanders. Here in the US, we don't see a ton of sheep or goat consumption. Sheep, less than 1 pound per person in the United States on average now. Probably 50 years ago, it was considerably higher than that. And then goats, probably much less than 1 pound per person. However, those numbers are increasing with our increasing populations. Okay, I think Dwayne's going to take it.
I guess I'll take this one. We were just kind of going back and forth. So there are different types of fiber. The sheep have different wool that's fine, medium, long, and a carpet. There's mohair that's on a goat, cashmere that's on a goat. The alpaca is from the alpaca, and then Angora is actually from a rabbit. Fiber sales may or may not make a significant portion of the enterprise income, and commodity prices may not cover production and marketing unless selling direct. Dairy is another possible way, and its primary source is from milk, cheese, or other dairy products. In most states, operation must be certified grade A or B to sell dairy products for human consumption. There is more investment required in the dairy part of it, but also there can be more profit if you have the market for it. Some of the things with pasture land management, they improve the quality of grass pasture by removing browse, brush, and forbs. And a little later on, we're going to see some co-grazing that Allison and Shane, Tiffany are going to talk about in the next segment. We've had people that have used sheep for a lawnmower. They can graze use browse, forbs, and grass in orchards or solar farms. There's a solar farm there that they're using sheep in there to graze. You can also do a feed-based grazing and turnkey grazing depending on animals, fencing, transportation, and care. It can be very profitable. Also, another one is agritourism. Having a dude or guest farm ranch to provide a real on-farm experience is one way. Others, with some of the breeds with horns, there can be an opportunity for hunters to go trophy hunting. In reproduction, you can see some of the differences. Puberty onset is from 5 to 12 months in sheep, 3 to 8 in goats, depending on the breeds, and there may be some outside of that. Nutrition would also come into play there. The average is about 7.5 for sheep and 6 for goats. When you breed them, you would like to have the sheep at 70% of their mature weight. For goats, it can be down as low as 60. The estrus cycle is 13 to 19 day average for sheep, or 13 to 19 days with 17 average. And for goats, a little longer at 18 to 23 with 21 day average. The duration is usually 24 to 36 hours with an average of 30 for sheep and 12 to 48 hours for goats with an average of 36. Gestation length is just a little shorter with sheep. You can see the average of 147 days and goats 150 days. Some other information, birth weight on sheep, there's quite a range, 4 to 15 pounds, depending on the breed and whether they're single or quads or more. Goats is 3 to 10 pounds with an average of 7 pounds in sheep and 6 pounds in goats. The temperature is pretty close at 100.9 in sheep to 103.8 with an average of 102.3, which is the same with the goats. And the range is a little bit narrower in goats. Some of the kidding rates, and this was just some estimates. They can be higher or lower than this depending on management, nutrition, and many other things, of course, the genetics too. Okay, sheep breeds. We have 3 purposes for the most part: milk, or meat, milk, and wool. And as we said earlier, some of the wool or coat types are fine, medium, long, carpet, and hair, and that's shedding. And another group that they have is a minor or other, and that's the other would be tail, prolificacy, they're minor, rare, or heritage sheep. Some of the wool breeds include some of the popular ones is the Merino and the Rambouillet. Right there's a picture of a Rambouillet. Some of the long ones, and we'll see more of those coming up. There's a list of the long wooled breeds, and there's quite a few. And these breeds are the ones that are known in the United States. There are probably others that we've missed, but this is the ones that are at least one list that was known. Fine wool, they grow the smallest wool diameter. The wool is the most valuable. They are adapted to hot, dry climates. They are hardy and long-lived, and they are gregarious, meaning they flock together, and when danger comes, they group together pretty good. They're less seasonal in their breeding habits, so they will tend to breed more out of season. And this represents about 50% of the world's sheep population. And here's a Merino and an American Cormo. The long wool, they grow the largest diameter and staple length and yield. Their wool is popular among hand spinners and wool craftsmen, and best adapted for high rainfall areas with abundant forages. You can see the different types there. There's a Lincoln, Romney, and a Lister long wool. And as we saw before, earlier slide, there was probably about 15 of them, the different breeds. Here's some of the meat breeds, and some of them are hair and some of them are wool. There's a picture of the Romanoff and a picture of the Suffolk. Some of the more popular ones in the hair are the Dorper, Katahdins, the Romanoffs. There's a few Royal Whites and St. Croix, and they represent about 10% of the world population. In the wool, we have Chevets, Dorsets, Hampshires, South Downs, Suffolks, Texels. Those are the more popular ones in the United States, and they represent about 15% of the world sheep population. On the hair medium wool, hair coats or a hair mix, they'll have a hair coat or a hair wool mix. They don't require shearing or tail docking. They can be resistant to parasites and some very prolific. Popularity is growing in the US. We get more and more hair sheep flocks. Katahdins and Dorpers are the most popular. The medium wool, they grow wool that is intermediate in fiber and diameter and staple length. They excel in meat production and growth and carcass. They're mostly British origin. And the popular breeds are the Suffolk, Dorset, Hampshires, and the South Downs. Here's some dual purpose ones. You can see the wool there. There's a Corriedale on the top right, or excuse me, Colombian. Then a Corriedale, the Finn sheep, I don't have on this slide, but it's one that's highly prolific. The Polypay was one that was made up in Du Bois. And the Targhee, you can see upper left, and then there's the dairy, the Awasha, probably mispronounce it, and the Lassane. They're crosses between fine wool and medium wool sheep. Whiteface tend to have better wool quality than the medium type wool breeds. You can see there's a few specialty breeds, the East Frisian, which is a dairy, the Finn sheep, which is very prolific. You can see the 4 babies there. And you can, and in the Polypay, which is a 4-way cross. Some of the minor species that we don't normally hear too much about: the Black Welsh Mountain, the Navajo Churio, the Icelandic, and a Caracool. And here's a picture of the Jacob sheep, which can have 4 horns coming out in different directions. But they vary in type and quality of wool they produce. They vary in characteristics. And some of them do possess some unique characteristics. They're double coated. They do provide carpet wool. They have 4 horns, rat tails, solid black. They have a Persian type lambskin, and many of them are the heritage breeds. Some of the others are some composites. The US Composite 4, which is known around here as the Easy Care, but it's a maternal line created by US Mark that's 25% Dorper, 25% Katahdin, and 50% Romanoff. You have the Sire Max. It's a terminal sire breed, and there's a lot of different breeds involved in this when they're coming through, and it's Colombian Texel, the Canadian Aircot, which was Suffolk and Ile de France, the US Mark Composite 3 terminal breed, which was 50% Colombian, 25% Suffolk, and 25% Hamp. And my understanding, they're reducing some of the Texel in their breed. It's only available on 4 different farms, and they make terminal sires, and we have some being used in this area. And then the last one is Aircot, or is a Rideau Aircot sheep. It's a maternal line created by the Agriculture Canadian Animal Research Center in Ottawa. And it's 20% Suffolk, 9% Shropshire, 14% East Frisian, 40% Finnish Landrace, 8% Dorset Horn, and the remaining 8% is Corriedale, Romanlat, North Country Cheviot, and Border Leicester. And you can see the picture of the Easy Care and Redu Aricot there. There may be others, composites and stuff, but these are kind of the three of the most popular around this area, or we have people interested in the Redu Aricot, and we haven't been able to get many of them down here. I think Alyssa's going to take over now.
All right, yeah. So on the goat side of things, just like the sheep, different breeds have different primary uses. So of course we've got meat, dairy, and then fiber and our mini goats. Next slide. Okay, so on our meat goat breeds, these are of course probably the most popular here in the US. The boar there on the upper right, boar is probably our most common breed. They're from South Africa and they're a very meaty, stocky, large goat. Then we have the Kiko down in the lower left there, that white colored girl. They are from New Zealand. They're a good meat breed that people say has good mothering abilities. There in the middle is a Spanish goat. That is kind of a rangy type meat goat. People also kind of common here in the United States. And then we have our pygmy goats, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and the Savannah on the lower right there, that white boy. And the Savannah goat, those have been selected from white boar goats. So just selection for white goats over time to create their own breed. All right, next one first. So next up, the dairy goat breeds. So the American Dairy Goat Association recognizes the breeds listed there. So for Swiss, we have the Saanen, which is those white ones up in the upper left-hand corner. They're heavy milk producers. They are generally white or a really light cream color. And they're known for having high milk fat in their milk. Then there on the right is a little Alpine goat. Alpines can be pretty much any color. They are considered more of a rangy type dairy goat and are adaptable to many different climates. Down on the lower left, you'll see a Nubian goat. So I'm sure we've all seen the Nubian goats. They're a very large, very tall goat, and also known to be pretty easy keeping. And then on the lower right there, we've got a La Mancha, which is just the dairy goats with those super short ears. And those can come in all different colors as well. And then there's a few other ones listed there. Yep, you're good, Dwayne. And then when we move on to fiber goats, so of course we have Angora and Cashmere. Angora are the ones on the left, not to be confused with the Angora fiber like Dwayne mentioned earlier. Angora goats produce mohair, and Angora fiber is actually from rabbits. And then the Cashmere goat there on the right, and those are a white, light colored goat. And then we have multiple crosses as well. Next one, we've just got the pygmy goats left, or the mini goats. So pygmies there on the left, that's a meat type small goat, very stocky. And then on the right there is a Nigerian dwarf, and that's a dairy type small goat. And then we have a number of crosses in addition to those two. All right, so next we're going to move into kind of just some of the differences between sheep and goats. As you'll see in the picture there, we have a number of different horn types for sheep and goats. In general, goats are probably more upright horns and sheep are more back, but they come in a variety of shapes. Dwayne, do you want to add anything on that one?
Just that the Jacob sheep tend to have more than two, and it's a real odd mix.
Great, thank you. And then on the next slide, so one really good thing about mixing sheep and goats and cattle is that they graze differently. They have different preferences for what types of feed they prefer. So goats are more of a top-down type of grazer. They really prefer browse, so brush, trees. Then they prefer weeds and grass. Now sheep, on the other hand, are the opposite of that. So they really prefer to be on the ground grazing grass and weeds. And then their kind of third preference is grazing on trees if they're available. And then cattle, of course, are primarily grass eaters and will eat some weeds and maybe a little bit of browse. So because those are so different, we know that co-grazing can be really successful on both animal production and pasture management. And I think Shane and Dr. Crane are going to talk a lot more about that here later on today.
With that, the sheep's tail will go down and the goat's tail will go up. Some of the sheep do look like goats, or some of the breeds, but that's one of the easy ways you can tell the difference. One of the things there, that's a Dorper, a white Dorper up on the upper left. Down at the bottom in Asia, they have and some of the desert areas over there, they have a fat-tailed sheep, and they store fat in their tail, which helps them in times when they don't have enough feed to graze over in that area. So their tail will get smaller once they use it, and then it'll get bigger when they do have adequate resources to eat. If you notice on the lips, the sheep have a vertical groove right in the center, and the goats don't have it. Sheep also have glands and tear glands beneath the eyes and scent glands beneath the toes, whereas goats have, the male goat has glands underneath the tail that develops a strong, distinct odor during mating season. Maybe Alyssa can attest to that.
Yes, most definitely.
Some of the other differences between sheep and goats: rams will kind of back up and in charge one another. Goats will rear up and in charge. Sheep are kind of distant and aloof, whereas, you give them enough time, they might become curious. But goats are curious and independent, and they'll come right up. Sheep usually are very gregarious, depending on the breed, and goats have a lesser herding instinct. Sheep prefer younger, tender graze, and goats like to get up on their hind legs and eat. As far as the sheep, if you get mature cheatgrass, you can't force them to eat it. So, that's one of the things, they like, that younger tender stuff. Sheep are easier to spook, where goats are more likely to seek shelter. Sheep are a little easier to fence, whereas the goats are a little harder to fence. Alyssa, you want to say something about that?
The adage about if you can't keep water in it, you can't keep a goat is completely true.
Sheep tend to be a little easier to handle, and goats are a little less robust. Sheep tend to do better in the cold, and goats are better in hot, humid weather. Sheep are called a flock, a group of them, and a group of goats are called a herd.
Okay, and then as we think about kind of some additional differences, we have some different daily gains. So on sheep, we're looking at a little higher daily gain than goats. Goats, we're looking at more like 1/4 to 1/3 pound per day of gain if we're doing a good job. Sheep, a little less agile. Goats, much more agile. That probably goes back to somewhat of the fencing requirements, that goats do need probably a much tighter fence than sheep. In our sheep populations, we see a lot more genetic diversity than goats. Sheep are, in general, known for having higher quality milk, while goats probably have higher quantities of milk production, but not the high quality. Just in general here in the United States, we see a huge range of flock sizes for our sheep. You know, we have people who have thousands of sheep and some who have just a few. Goats, we don't tend to see those large producers near as much as the sheep. We tend to have just smaller flocks in general.
That should be,
What?
that should be heard. Sorry about that. I messed up on the slide.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, smaller herds. And then sheep, just kind of in general, more muscular, and goats more slender. Sheep actually deposit their fat externally, except for the hair sheep, which are like goats, where they're depositing fat internally as well. And then sheep, more traditional, but a growing market for sure. And then goats, very new to the United States, but definitely a growing market. Oh,
You can, go ahead.
sorry. And as we look at milk composition, like we kind of noted in that last slide, so for sheep, we're just looking at a lot higher quality. So we're looking at higher protein and higher fat in their milk, whereas goats, again, higher production, but not as high of quality of milk.
Sheep tend to have no beard, where most goats have a beard, depending on the breed, I think. Some of the other differences between sheep and goats, there's some nutritional considerations. Sheep can suffer from copper toxicity, while goats can have copper deficiency. So that's one of the things, if you're running them together, it's hard to keep mineral in front of them that will satisfy both of their needs. Sheep are usually a larger framed animal and can eat a little more dry matter, and some of those exceptions include the hair sheep. Sheep have a higher maintenance requirements than cattle, but goats have a slightly higher maintenance requirements than sheep. Sheep will eat about 1/3 of their dry matter body weight, whereas goats will eat about 5%. And some of the pharmaceutical considerations, goats need about 1.5 to 2 times the dose of a warmer than sheep based on weight. There are some extra label respiratory medicines. For sheep, it's Nuflora that works. For goats, it's Exenel.
And I'll add in there on that slide, if you, in my experience, when I first started out, I was feeding a sheep mineral to my goats, and that actually caused a lot of problems. So make sure that you're matching your mineral to your small ruminant species. Okay. Thanks, Dwayne. So in general, sheep and goats are very similar in the facilities that they need. So when we're looking at feeders, our sheep are looking at about, our goats are looking at about 1.5 feet of bunk space, and then a little less than that for a self feeder because they're able to come up multiple times a day. Ewes just about the same at about 1.5 feet, and then a little less on that self feeder. When we're thinking about building spaces, so for goats, we're looking at about 10 square feet in a building and about 20 to 25 in general in a lot space. Ewes, just being a larger animal, are going to need a little bit larger space. So looking at more like 12 square feet in a building and then 25 to 40 in a lot. When we look down at the bottom there, it talks about shed height. Both species thinking about 10 feet for a shed. I have a shed at my place that is probably between 4.5 and 5 feet tall, and it's a real pain to clean out. So whenever you're thinking about putting in facilities, make sure that they work for both the animals and you so that you can clean them appropriately and clean them often.
The other reason for the minimum shed height is if you have them in total confinement, you need to have the ammonia that will it needs to be up high enough. So that's another reason for, if you're doing total confinement, of the higher height. Some of the similarities, facilities are almost the same as far as the sizes. It's a lot less acres required than cattle. Requires less investment than other livestock. And in general, they're easier to handle than other livestock. Although I will say that when we were working sheep one time, my mom bent down to try and move one and the ewe jumped up and hit her in the chin and knocked her out. So it can happen, but generally they're easier to move. And they do tend to complement your other farm enterprises from your farming, your foraging, and your pasture. They do have similar diseases. Coccidia is one that's it can be a real issue in both sheep and goats, as is the overeating, the Clostridium perfringens type CD and tetanus. They do have similar production practices and inputs, similar constraints. In some years, prices. Right now, prices are good for both, but sometimes it's hard to find customers. We do have a growing customer base for both, and so that's really helpful. One of the other things is predators, and depending on where you're at, some predator control it can be one of the biggest concerns you have. We do have some of the controls there that we have listed are dogs, donkeys, fences, and llamas.
Okay, and then another similarity between sheep and goats, we need to be thinking about parasite control. We know that both are susceptible, and especially goats are very susceptible to internal parasites. So staying on top of it is extremely important, and using the FAMACHA scoring to know how anemic your animals are to kind of help identify infestations is key. And then if you do need to worm, use a sacrifice area so that you can put wormed animals in that area, and you don't have to use it when you're kidding or in other times. And then when you think about resources, as with kind of any livestock species, don't exceed your resource limits. So we talked about the space requirements for housing and feeding and watering, and then for sure labor. We know that small ruminants or small animals do take some increased labor. So be thinking about that if you're thinking about getting into sheep and goats, especially during kidding or lambing. And then if you're going to use pasture, going back to that fencing and making sure that you have everything in place. And then just the same philosophy as how we talk about matching your cattle to your land, match your sheep and goats to all the resources that we just mentioned. Okay, and as with cattle, again, when you're breeding, remember that crossbreeding provides some heterosis. So the more different your breeds are, the more heterosis you're going to get, the more free lunch, as we like to say. And then it can be hard to find a veterinarian that is comfortable with sheep and goats. So finding one and then developing that veterinary client-patient relationship is really important, especially before you really need it. So having that in place before you have an issue where you need to get help right away. And then of course, you're going to need that veterinary client-patient relationship as you get antibiotics and certain antibiotic feeds. And then body condition scoring is on a 1 to 5 scale. It's the same for sheep and goats. So 1, you're looking at very, very skinny, and 5, you're looking at obese. So in general, you want to keep animals around that 2.5 to 3.5 middle ground range. And then learning how to tube a lamb or a kid, of course, is essential, especially when you're just getting into it. It's important to know so that when you do have, because you probably will have a weak lamb or a kid that needs some extra help, and you can provide that for them.
In conclusion, there are more similarities than differences. Both require smaller investments than other livestock industries. They can work together and with cattle. One issue is copper. Both can be very profitable right now. And if you have a question, ask your veterinarian, a sheep and goat specialist, or a county extension agent. Be careful of the source of your information on some of the internet, from some of the internet sources. Use research-based information. And if you are having trouble finding a veterinarian, we do have one that's going to be speaking later, and one who was supposed to give this presentation, but she had a personal problem come up. And so we can get you some names of veterinarians, and when you find a good one, they're really great to have around. Are there any questions? If there's no questions, I guess we will go to our break, and we will be starting at 11:15 with the co-grazing with Dr. Allison Crane and Shane Tiffany, who's a cattle producer down in Southeast, South Central Southeast. He can correct me when he gets on. And we have a recorded video that they've done for an agent training that's excellent, and they will be on to answer any and all questions. So with that, we're going to take a break until about 11:15, play the sponsors videos again, and then we'll go to break.